Buenos días, buenas tardes y buenas
Good
noches.
morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, and welcome to the second day of the One Welfare World Conference. It's a virtual conference, but we're still from Burgos. I would like to start explaining a bit of the day that we have ahead. Yesterday was a very intense and interesting day, full of different topics and areas that inspire us, a lot of questions, a lot of ideas to keep on moving forward in the One Wealth approach. Today we have three different sessions. Again, we will continue the same line that we started yesterday. On the first session, we have an extraordinary session because we wanted to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. And as yesterday, we already talked about this pandemic because it has been a way of alerting people of the interrelation between animal and human welfare and the environment. Therefore, this is a topic that is crucial to create a discussion, to compile data, to understand the connections that sometimes are just usually confined to the health dimension, but it's important to be aware of the fact that this affects absolutely every aspect of the well-being and welfare. So we'll start talking about this special section on One Welfare and COVID-19. Later on, we'll keep on talking about the One Welfare approach, talking about biodiversity and sustainability, talking about the connections between biodiversity, the environment, animal welfare, and human well-being. This second part or second session is key for the future of the planet because it has a lot to do with the different animal species that have been affected by the climate change, how our own global well-being is being affected by it. So again, this is also a very relevant session, very complex because there's a lot of conflicts in the area when you're talking about biodiversity and how to protect the animal welfare. So we will have different speakers talking about different aspects, and we'll see the amazing work that different colleagues are already doing in this field. Many of these are trailblazers and showing us what they've been doing to create an awareness on these topics. And we will be talking about wildfires, not only in Australia. Yesterday I talked about the situation in Australia, but we are seeing these wildfires almost everywhere. This is a reality that is becoming more and more frequent. And when you watch the news, we see how climate change affects something that we see every single day in different parts of the world, effects that are affecting communities and animals, livestock industry, the environment in general. So we really need to pay attention to these topics. We need to think about the next steps, the steps that we can take individually in order to mitigate and to prevent these effects so that our children and the planet could have a future. And finally, we'll have our last session, section number 6, that will be talking about assisted interventions involving animals, humans, and the environment. We will be having a keynote talking about laboratory animals. A lot of people ask me what is the position of lab animals in One Welfare approach. And well, for me, it's part of the assisted interventions involving animals because a laboratory test is, after all, an intervention. We work with animals in a way that will have a direct impact on human well-being and animal welfare in a way. And we'll have that keynote, and from there we'll also go into a series of oral presentations talking about this assisted intervention involving animals topic that is right now very popular because it has been promoted through, sorry, yesterday was a very long day and I just lost the word that I was looking for. So again, these assisted interventions have been promoted after what has happened with the pandemic. So this is not just a kind of intervention where humans are the focus, but animals should also be considered and their welfare as well. so that everyone could improve their well-being, and we should work together to make both animals and humans' well-being a relevant priority. So we've been working in different countries to create protocols to standardize this emerging field. It's growing year after year, and the growth, in fact, has been going faster than the protocols and standards that we have for its management. So again, a very interesting session. Finally, we will have our awesome sessions awards ceremony, and we will talk about the different awards for oral presentations and best posters given by the scientific committee. The awesome sessions, we told each of the speakers of the awesome award, well, be there. Check the ceremony, because if you are the winners, we'll call you and we'll try to have you there so that you can talk a little bit more about your project and about why you're interested in the One Welfare approach. And from there, final remarks and the wrap up. And we'll let you know which will be the next organizing committee that will work really hard to create the next One Welfare conference. So there's a lot to talk about. We have a lot to talk about One Welfare and COVID-19. So I'm going to present Anne Quain from Australia. She's been working really hard today, but she's here. And it's a great pleasure to see you again, even though we are doing it virtually. I wish you were here in Burgos, but I'm going to continue in English to talk with Anne a little bit. And if you need to use a translation, remember that you can change the channel to listen it.
Welcome you, Anne. I'm very glad to see you here, and I will hand over to you. So Anne is joining us from Australia, and she will be moderating and chairing the first session on One Welfare and COVID. So over to you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and congratulations again for convening this amazing Congress. I'm sorry that I can't be in Spain today, but I'm in Australia, and I know there are some Australian delegates online, which is wonderful. So g'day from Sydney, the land of the Eora people of the Gadigal Nation. I'm very proud to be here, and I'm getting emotional too because it's a very special conference. As I said, my name is Anne Quain. I'm from the University of Sydney in the Sydney School of Veterinary Science, and I'll be chairing the session this morning. The session is going to be made up of 3 parts. So we will have our keynote speaker first, followed by oral presentations, and then we'll have the One Welfare Science Slam session. If you'd like to ask questions of our keynote speaker, you can write them in the Q&A section. And also, don't forget to vote for your favorite presentations. We are going to have short questions at the end of the presentations, and the speaker will have the opportunity to answer questions in writing if they're not able to do so during the sessions. We just want to make sure everyone stays to time. So without further delay, I would like to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Him Hu Yap from the National Parks Board in Singapore, who's going to be talking about COVID-19 and One Welfare, impacts and recovery highlights from Singapore. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Quain. Let me just upload the slides. Are you seeing the slides well? Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for the introduction again, Dr. Quain. Colleagues, I'm happy to be here, and it's a great pleasure to be presenting at this forum. Our City in Nature is our Singapore vision that we recently announced, and how this vision enables Singapore to cope with the COVID-19, as well as looking after the well-being of our Singaporeans. Just a quick introduction of a National Parks Board, or NParks for short. We are the lead agencies for greenery, biodiversity conservation, and animal health and welfare, as well as wildlife management. We are committed in enhancing and managing the urban ecosystem of our city in nature. With that in mind, we work closely with our community to enhance the quality of our living environment. This is the outline of the presentation. I will go through the context of how big city in nature comes about. At the same time, I will talk a bit about the impact of COVID-19 to Singapore and what are the benefits of nature as well as pet ownership. Hopefully, after the presentation, you have a sense of how this is very much aligned with the One Welfare concepts. Just in case people are not familiar with Singapore, we are actually a very small island at the equator, in fact, 1 degree north of equator. The weather is generally warm and humid, and we are also in a region dominated by rainforests as well as mangroves. Just to give you a sense of the size, we are only about 728 square kilometers, a very small island state, highly urbanized and densely populated. Our population is about 5 million on that small space. So to us, land is precious, greenery is precious, nature area is precious, right? Since independence, which is about 56 years ago, we have always imbued greenery into our city planning. We intensify tree planting. We strengthen the connectivity of our parks and greenery with our park connector networks, which is what is written there as PCN, and integrate greenery with our built environment. This sees us evolving from garden city in our early days of independence to city in a garden. As we move with time, and even with the pervasive greenery that we have in Singapore, like many countries, we are faced with a couple of key challenges. Climate change definitely is one of them, and increasing urbanization. There has been a projection that if nothing is done for climate change, temperature in Singapore could hit 40 degrees centigrade as early as 2045. The current SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 situation presents another big challenge for us, especially in a very densely populated country like ours. And I guess we can be quite honest about it. This is not just going to be the only pandemic that we'll face. In future, we'll probably face other kind of situation, right? With these challenges as a backdrop, and to continue providing a high quality living environment for Singaporeans, our response is to transform Singapore from a city in a garden into city in nature. That actually creates a new paradigm of city planning. And it's an approach that will not just have greenery in our city, but also to restore nature. We are doing this, I guess, is to more or less to make sure that our Singaporeans enjoy a livable space, sustainable, as well as coexisting with our island's native flora and fauna. In the face of the urban heat island effect and other effects of climate change, we aim also to apply nature-based solutions to achieve climate, ecological, and social resilience through this city in nature planning concept. Recently, we announced the Singapore Green Plan 2030. And this was immediately after our announcement of City in Nature, and it was very timely because City in Nature was identified as one of the key pillars of the Green Plan. There are other 4 key pillars, which are resilient future, sustainable living, energy reset, and green economy. So this is pretty much a whole of government approach in terms of keeping our environment green, and city in nature being one of the key pillars. City in nature is our solution to our key challenges because we feel strongly that nature provides positive ecosystem services that humans can benefit from and harness. Some of these positive ecosystem services that come from a healthy natural ecosystem include cleaner water, fresher air, cooler temperatures, as well as health and well-being of our people. So in transforming Singapore into a city in nature, we are not doing this for nature's sake, but for our own sake, and to ensure continual livability and well-being for our people. There are 5 key strategies in the transformation, which I will briefly go through them in subsequent slides. They are all listed here. Underpinning these strategies and ensuring the success of city in nature is the role of community and every individuals, that is for them to become stewards of nature. The first strategy is to extend whatever limited natural capital that we have beyond the nature reserve. Okay, we have 2 identified nature reserves in Singapore, one in central area, the other in the northwestern part. What we have done is that abutting this nature reserve, we have built nature parks. These are shown in the dark green. Okay, this is the nature parks, and these are all the nature parks. If you look at my mouse, okay, and they are surrounding the central. This is the central catchment nature reserves, and similar here, you got your nature reserves, right? Today, these nature parks not only serve as expanded habitats for our native flora and fauna, it also creates a recreational node for our people. So people could actually experience nature in these nature parks without exerting any pressure on the nature reserve, because nature reserve is something that we do want to conserve, and that's pretty much the source of all our nature, our native flora and fauna. We have more than 350 hectares of nature parks in the central and northwestern part of Singapore today. But we will be looking at opportunities of having more nature parks in other parts of Singapore. Strategy 2 is actually to integrate natural designs and planting into our existing parks and gardens. In most instances, parks and gardens are generally curated, all right, very man-made. But over time, we have realized that it's sometimes necessary to introduce the natural form into our gardens and parks. This may be hard to understand. In Singapore, it's a very deliberate action to make our parks and gardens natural. All right. So it's actually man-made intervention, but once we come in the first instance, subsequently we will let it grow on its own. So that's the approach that we have for our parks and gardens, and that allows our Singaporeans to appreciate nature and biodiversity in their neighborhood parks, in their regional parks, and as well as gardens. One of the observations that we found as well is that the biodiversity and the nature, the field of nature in their proximity actually benefit them in their health and well-being, which I will elaborate a bit more in some of the studies that we do. Third strategy is to actually restore nature into our urban landscape. As I mentioned earlier, Singapore is very urbanized. More than 90% of our land is actually with infrastructure. The one on the left, if you look at this, called Kampong Admiralty, is actually a public housing complex. So basically, you've got people living there, you've got shops, and you've got malls as well. Small little malls, as well as car parks at the basement. So what it has is that we have actually infused greenery into the entire structure by having sky-rise greenery, and that will in fact cool the building down, and we'll use less of a artificial cooling system in many of the open spaces. Right. On the right, this is an industrial area. If you look at the top photos, that is before we start doing any work on it. there was no tree. It's just a verge with green verge, and that's all. But subsequently, we started building plants on the road verge. And not only that, we actually introduced native trees and planting it in the multi-tier fashion. You don't see just a sort of monoculture, but you see many different type of trees and plants. And that creates a forest-like structure along our roads. And in doing so, it also attracts biodiversity, such as our birds and butterflies, the pollinators. What we call these roads is that this kind of planting is a nature ways. Strategy 4 is actually strengthening connectivity between our green spaces. If you look at the picture on the left, the photo on the left, all these lines that you've seen, whether it's green or whether it's a bit of a golden lines, they are all connectors of our green spaces. We connect the nature reserves to some of our parks. And not only are these physical connections between the parks, they are also ecological corridor. This means that there will be easier movement of biodiversity across the islands. And that allows our native floras and as well as your faunas, whether it's the birds or the bees, to go to regional parks from the nature reserves, and likewise the other way around. Okay, so these are some examples on the right, are some of the examples of the nature way, which act has our corridors as well as connectors of parks. And the bottom is also another one, which is at the coastal area, which is slightly different because of the marine nature of it and the coastal nature of it. The last strategy is the development of excellence in the veterinary care, animal and wildlife management. We see this as a strong enabler in our city in nature. A robust animal health system with effective biosurveillance is crucial. It helps to identify, prevent, manage emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. It's also a process of gathering, integrating, interpreting, as well as communicating information related to diseases affecting animals and humans. As the Animal Health and Welfare Authority of Singapore, MPARKS aims to establish a world-class animal health surveillance system to gather information and as well as to guide animal and public health policy makers in making effective decisions regarding animal health. Animals play a vital role in our society as companions, such as our dogs and cats. In the case of wildlife, it enriches the biodiversity of our urban ecosystem. Our well-being and health are interconnected with the health and welfare of animals in our community and environment. MPARKS works closely with partners in the veterinary and animal sectors to strengthen the capacities and enhance competency in animal health, animal welfare, and management. Wildlife management plays an integral role in promoting human-wildlife coexistence. In a city in nature, where our urban infrastructure is in close proximity with our green spaces, to this end, MPARKS adopts a scientific approach to the management of human-wildlife interaction. And there are 4 pros in this approach. First of all, we will have to understand the population ecology, how we're going to manage the population of the wildlife. There's a big part in public education. And of course, we want to promote community stewardship in nature and wildlife management. This is a 1 million trees movement, which is an example of how we harness the strength of the community to transform Singapore into city in nature. Here you see a group of residents planting native trees along our road, creating a nature way. And if you look at them, they are all wearing the mask, and this is during the COVID period. And you still see a lot of enthusiasm in the community as they recognize the benefits of having trees in their neighborhood. In the next few slides, I'll talk a bit about the impact of COVID-19 on our parks and green spaces, as well as how it affects the behavior of Singaporeans. This slide shows the movement of Singaporeans from February 2020 to November 2020. This is the period where we are experiencing the initial COVID-19 measures, which could be quite, I would say, a bit more tough for the people. For example, in the period of April to June 2020, which is this period, we are having we had a modified lockdown, which we call it as a circuit breaker period, where we've seen most people staying at home in the residential. Okay, some of them are actually allowed to go to do their grocery shoppings, but majority of them will not visit any other places. Definitely not the workspace, not in workplaces, not at the retail and recreation, and not even at the parks. But after June 2020, there was a surge in visitorship to the parks. I guess that's probably a period where people need to find respite after the lockdown, and they would like to visit some place. And parks are actually in Singapore is identified as a low risk area. If we drill down deeper into the type of parks that that Singaporeans visit, you see a big increase in the visitorship to nature parks, which is denoted by this line, the yellowish line. All right, and it has actually come up right up there compared to the visitorship to your nature reserves, which we try to restrict the number of people going there as well. So you do see that there's a sense of appreciation to the nature settings in the nature park. Even though I did mention that we try to clamp down or try to not to allow too many people to visit the nature reserves, we do see there was a surge of people going to the nature reserves. In December, we actually hit a peak of 88,000 people, which is a large number of people. And understandably, this is the period where students are not going to school, and there is a school holiday period. Similarly, for botanic gardens, we see the number sort of remaining stable. The only difference is that in the past, before pre-COVID, more than 50% of the visitors to Singapore Botanic Gardens are actually overseas visitors, right? So this time round, we're actually getting local visitors going over to visiting our Singapore Botanic Gardens. This is just some of the articles that we have during this period, where it shows the appreciation of our parks and people visiting them, doing their exercise during the COVID period. In many instances, we also have to, because of the safe distancing measures that we imposed during the COVID, there has to be a bit of enforcement work done on the site to make sure that people do not crowd around. So this is probably one of the downside, but it's an issue that we need to deal with. At the same time, throughout this whole period, none of our parks, gardens, or nature reserve were closed to the public. We just need to manage the numbers because we recognize that these are the places that people need to visit to get their respite. We'll talk a bit about the benefits of nature and pet ownership, especially during this COVID period. We have done a study to show, to try to correlate the life satisfaction and natural spaces. This study in particular shows that if someone visited more diverse types of natural spaces, and if they have a window view of natural views, this is one of the parks in our town, and if they have they have a strong connection with nature and spend more than 1 hour a week in natural spaces, we actually found that these people do have a perception of a higher life satisfaction. So that in itself is a very positive impact of natural spaces as well as parks on people during this COVID period. The other programs that NParks laid out was actually to promote therapeutic gardens. One of the things that we have been working for years is actually to develop therapeutic gardens, allowing some of our more sedentary segments of our population, for instance, the senior, to engage in some physical activities like growing their own crops, growing their flowers, and that actually create a therapeutic effect. And definitely, this has actually taken up quite a bit during the COVID period, and people are actually growing fruits and growing their vegetables in their gardens, as well as the ornamental plants. At the same time, while we are catering to the general population, we are also programming and customizing the programs for certain children with special needs. The other thing that we talk about when we talk about appreciation of nature is that we want to imbue that kind of mindset into our youngs, into our children. What we have done is that we have do away with the conventional type of playgrounds, or trying to do away with them, and introduce nature play gardens. We believe that this will improve the mental and physical well-being of the children, improve their cognitive functions as well, and we also feel that it will actually help them to understand and appreciate nature at a very young age. The other part that I think most of my esteemed speakers after me will be talking about is pet ownership, and how this pet ownership during this COVID period help us cope with the pandemic stress. In Singapore, we see a great increase in the number of people seeking out pets, whether it's through adoption or purchases. This naturally leads to a demand for veterinary services, even though it's a COVID period where many businesses are affected. The veterinary services continue to function and continue to be busy. Of course, with pet ownership during this COVID period, one big concern that we have is the risk of abandonment once the COVID period is over and everyone starts going back to work. That's the part that we would need to address. In fact, we were fortunate enough that we have already started regulating all the pet shops and require them to share with their potential clients the role of the pet owner as well as responsible pet ownership. That's important so that we do not see the repercussion of abandonments and as well as poor treatment of pet animals. As I mentioned earlier, there was a strong emphasis on responsible pet ownership. And with that, we actually roll out quite a fair bit of outreach material and education material to encourage people how to manage their pets, and even also to look at what to do before you adopt an animal, for instance, from a shelter. I think shelter animals are tend to be needs a bit more attention because they are probably a lot of our shelter animals probably had a history of poor treatment, and that's why it's important when you go into adoption, they need to understand how they manage them and how to deal with shelter animals. At the responsible pet ownership, we also talk to schools as well as at the preschool level even, to tell them about how to take care of your animals and not to purchase animals on impulse. And if you do want to purchase animals, what would you need to do? So starting from young is something that we believe in, and there's an area that we have actually been focusing quite a lot on in our outreach programs. Because of the COVID period, we also realized that the comfort of animals brings to the community. We started, this is still at its we're still at the initial stage where we are embarking on programs to introduce animal-assisted interventions into some of the social services facilities. We are also preparing outreach material. And in fact, we have actually rolled out some of this outreach material through our webinar to create the awareness of AI. This is ongoing work, as I mentioned earlier, and we are actually seeing some good progress in the initial phase. With that, I thank you for your attention and welcome any questions.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And I think many of us can relate to the experiences you were talking about with COVID. Certainly in my area, we're in week 13 of hard lockdown at the moment in Sydney, and our green spaces are life-saving. They're really important. So it was wonderful hearing your presentation. And I guess a question, I'm happy for people to pop some questions in the list. I don't have any yet, but I would like to ask a question if I may. And that is approximately how long does it take to create some of those green spaces that you've presented? I imagine some of them, particularly with the big trees, might take years.
Yeah. Like I say, it took us 50 over years to reach city in nature vision. I think we were fortunate enough in the sense that our forefathers, or our founding fathers, actually realized that it's important to have greenery, and they were very mindful that they do not want to see Singapore as a concrete jungle, and that's why we started planting. So I would say that we started right from day one when we gained independence. And that's how we do it. But along the way, as I mentioned, we started as a garden city. We evolved into city in a garden, and now it's city in nature. So what we'll see in the next 5 to 10 years is that you will see that our landscape is no longer a very, what I would say, a very curated kind of a landscape. Rather, you will see a bit of wildness in it. So along the streetscapes, you will see trees like forests, basically grow like forests, multi-tiers, as well as native trees, so that they will adapt to the conditions. They are well adapted to the conditions. And at the same time, we will introduce some of the biodiversity, which is your bees and your birds. So I couldn't give you an answer as to how many years, but it's definitely an ongoing effect, ongoing efforts. And for the nature reserves, I think those are the areas that we are focusing on, because those are definitely our primary forests, which we would not want to damage them. What we're going to do is we're going to see more nature parks around the nature reserves, and that's actually in the plan. And one thing about Singapore is because of our our land scarcity issue is sometimes will require us to introduce some of these nature spaces into an urban environment too. So let's say if there's a housing project, we will work with the housing developers to build in some of the regional green parks in the housing project, as well as into the infrastructure. So that's an ongoing exercise. Thanks for your question, Anne.
It's a beautiful vision. It sounds absolutely wonderful and very important. I do have another question from an audience member, and that is, recognizing many urban centres struggle with competing priorities, what is your perspective on key messaging to gain public and political support to put funds and land base for natural landscapes rather than other demands?
Yeah. That's a very good question. In fact, we are dealing with it day to day. How we're going to make sure that we try to take care of everyone's need, because everyone's pretty diverse about what land should be used for. I've been talking to my colleagues in the housing development board, and to explore with them how we could introduce greenery into their housing developments. So one thing about Singapore, while it's small, coordination is a lot tighter. Government agencies work very closely together. Whether you are the planner, city planner, whether you are the housing developer or industry developer, we actually have a very strong what I would say is a planning team where we involve everyone, every agency. That's important from a government perspective. The other part that is quite important is the engagement with the community. And when we talk about community, it's not a uniform group, it's everyone will have their needs. So the government pays a lot of attention in terms of engaging the people, and we will get groups of different needs coming in together to share their ideas and to also understand each other's perspective. It's an ongoing exercise, and we have many iterations of that. And that's how we try to balance it out. And once a decision has been made, then a plan will come out and we will consult others again. I think it's a deliberate effort that the government wants to do, because I think we all see that everyone will have the needs, and we do need to address some of them. And if we can't, we'll just have to explain. Yeah.
Thank you. They're great tips from one welfare implementation at policy level perspective. So thank you very much for sharing. We have time for one more question. I'm just going to update and see if anyone's asked another question. So one is, has there been evidence of any negative impact on the wildlife during the COVID restriction period?
Yes. We do have wild boars coming onto our streets. There has been a few instances of wild boar attacks on humans. So that's when we need to go out and manage the issue very quickly, because you do want to arrest the issue early. At the same time, there has been a lot of publicity going out to tell people what not to do. I think one of the issues that we notice is that during the COVID period, some people may feel a bit, I guess, during the lockdown, they feel that they need to get out, and some of them started feeding wildlife, which is something that present as an issue. So we have actually gone out for a lot of what I would say a campaign to advise people not to feed animals, wildlife especially, and to ask them how to behave when they see any wildlife on the street. So those are messages that we go out, and we work very closely with the grassroots as well as the community to spread those messages. But one important thing is that when there's an attack, the agencies that's responsible for wildlife management has to be on the ground to deal with the issue straight away. I think those are the approach that we take in terms of during this COVID period. Yeah.
Thank you. And I note that you've spent a lot of time on community engagement. That's been a strong theme through your presentation. It sounds like it's very important to have strong ideas, but also make sure that you bring people with you. So in every aspect of what you're doing. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, and please accept a virtual round of applause from our audience around the world. It was absolutely fantastic. And now I'd like to start on our next session of oral presentations. So I would like to introduce our first speaker. So we'll be hearing from Katrina Holland from the Dogs Trust in the UK about concerns and experiences of accessing veterinary care during the COVID-19 pandemic, a mixed methods analysis of dog owners' responses. And I'm sorry, there is a dog in the background, and it's not my dog. I apologize for the noise, but it shows how topical this is. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Katrina Holland, and today I'm going to present findings of our study into the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on access to veterinary care in the UK. In order to control the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries imposed restrictions on the movement of their citizens. In the UK, following a period of advisory isolation and social distancing, lockdown measures were formally announced by the government on the 23rd of March 2020. During the strict lockdown period, people were permitted to only leave their home for essential reasons, including to shop for essential supplies such as food and medicine, essential work where remote working wasn't possible, medical needs, and to only take one exercise outing away from home per day. Guidelines for veterinary work were published by the British Veterinary Association, outlining that for the period 23rd of March to the 14th of April, only urgent treatment and emergency healthcare were permitted. During this time, there was an 80 to 90% reduction in veterinary consultations, whilst vets were seeing emergencies only. Restrictions on veterinary work were relaxed on the 14th of April, and by September, veterinary caseloads had returned to normal. Previous studies have explored dog owners' experiences in relation to healthcare seeking during the initial months of the pandemic, but the longer-term impact remains unexplored. Therefore, this study aims to firstly explore dog owners' concerns and experiences related to accessing veterinary healthcare, and describe owner-reported ability to access veterinary services, all during the first 8 months of the pandemic. The data for the study were collected using 2 surveys and electronic diaries that were designed to explore the impact of COVID-19 on dogs and their owners. The first survey collected data between the 4th of May and the 7th of July, while the follow-up survey was open between 5th of October and 4th of November. In addition, we collected open-ended entries to diaries administered to the general population and Generation Pup cohort. Generation Pup is an ongoing longitudinal study of dogs with an existing diary feature enabling owners to make notes digitally. These were collected between the 23rd of March and the 4th of November, whilst the general population diaries were completed between 4th of May and 4th of November. The diary for the general public and the COVID surveys were promoted through social media, a Dogs Trust newsletter, coverage in New Scientist magazine, and by contacting current and previous research participants who consented to being contacted about future research. Generation Pup participants were reminded to use the existing diary feature via an email. Our methods of data collection generated a combination of quantitative and qualitative data. From the first survey, we analysed responses to open-ended questions regarding concerns related to dog ownership and responses to closed questions on concerns regarding the availability of veterinary care. From the follow-up survey, we analysed responses to 2 open-ended questions about concerns related to dog ownership and experiences of accessing veterinary care. And we also looked at the responses to closed questions about seeking and accessing veterinary care for preventative and acute health needs. Our analysis of the quantitative data was conducted in R, whilst the qualitative data we collected were analysed using a reflexive thematic analysis with support from NVivo software. Following data cleaning, we had 5,063 responses to our first survey. Across our diary studies, we had a total of 1,191 entries from 359 unique diary respondents. Our follow-up survey generated a further 2,537 usable responses. Across the surveys and diaries, most of the respondents were female. The most common age group of survey and diary respondents was 55 to 64 years of age. Findings from the first survey revealed that the potential availability of veterinary care concerned 1/3 of respondents. However, the subsequent follow-up survey found that contact with an owner's veterinary practice was obtained in 99.5% of cases in which this was sought since the start of the lockdown. Findings of our follow-up survey revealed that 22.2% of respondents had experienced a remote consultation, i.e. a consultation by telephone, video, or email, since the start of lockdown. Although most respondents reported they were able to access veterinary care when it was needed, the follow-up survey showed that routine prophylactic treatments were often delayed or cancelled, reflecting the early lockdown restrictions on veterinary practices and subsequent delays. Delays or cancellations affected 28% of dogs that owners planned to neuter. 17.8% of respondents said that neutering was cancelled due to COVID-19, whilst a smaller proportion reported that the procedure had taken place but had been delayed. Regarding vaccinations, 10.5% said they had been unable to vaccinate their dog due to the pandemic. A further 1/4 of respondents, 23.7%, experienced delays in vaccinating their dogs. Moving on to our qualitative findings. Overall, our respondents described considerable variation in the measures in place across time and between practices. Respondents reported that waiting outside of the practice to be called in for a consultation was common, as was wearing face coverings and sanitising hands. People also described contactless or distance delivery of services, including the collection of and payment for medications. For example, one person said, "I have phoned our vets. I have requested wormers and made the payment over the phone. They've advised me to ring them when I'm in the car park, and they will bring it to me." To adhere to social distancing and reduce the risk of COVID-19 transmission, many practices were offering car park consultations. Some consultations were conducted using telemedicine, as our survey found. Our qualitative findings suggest that this impacted on client-vet communication by making it harder for some respondents to understand their vet. One participant described it as very impersonal, how consultations take place at the car or in an outdoor yard. They went on to say that follow-up is by telephone and it all feels very rushed with little contact by the vet. Masks make conversations difficult and paying is done on the street. However, other participants thought that video consultations were helpful and reassuring. Some people thought that the pandemic didn't have much impact on how they accessed the vet. For instance, as one participant said, vets have been really good and been open throughout with just a few changes to practices. The main difference in the vet-client interactions during the pandemic was that during most consultations, dog owners were not allowed to go inside the practice with their dog. A minority of owners felt that this did not have an impact on their dog. A few owners actually thought their dog seemed better without them there. And one owner said both of their dogs really enjoy going to the vet and will happily rush in without me, which is a great advantage during this COVID outbreak. However, many others were upset about being unable to accompany their dog. A number of owners stated that this impacted on their ability to ask questions and to fully explain the health issue to their vet. As one participant wrote, they found it more difficult to ask questions at vet appointments because I couldn't go in with the dog. Owners were also concerned about being unable to reassure their dog and thought that as a result of being unable to accompany the dog, the visit was more stressful for the dog than usual. For example, one person wrote that at his last visit for bloods, the dog seemed extremely stressed. Not being able to go in with him negatively affected him, and I don't want him to go through that again. Unfortunately, a small number of dog owners experienced having to euthanize their dog without being present, which was very distressing to them. As this person explained, "We had our dog put to sleep. It was very upsetting as we could not go into the vet surgery because of COVID-19 restrictions. Everything had to be done outside in a public car park. The The dog was still treated very well by the vet. It was just distressing for us as we did not have much privacy. Echoing our quantitative survey findings, many dog owners expressed concerns about accessing veterinary services. For example, one owner said they had some slight concerns about how they would access good veterinary treatment if it were needed for their dogs. Overall, owners reported mixed experiences of actually accessing veterinary services, with many reporting delays. Most people were pleased with the quality of care they did receive. For example, one person said the vets are doing an incredible job in really tough circumstances. However, as a result of COVID-related restrictions and delays, some people reported poor quality of care. For example, one person said, because of COVID, we couldn't go into the vet with her. When the vet examined her, they couldn't find it, a suspicious lump, and said there was nothing wrong with her, but the lump is still there. Another person expressed their frustration with trying to book a non-emergency appointment. As they said, I phoned for advice in May, but the nurse on the phone just seemed to want to get me off the phone and said it wasn't an emergency and had to wait. There was virtually no guidance on when non-emergency appointments would open, so it was difficult to plan anything. In conclusion, our study found that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the availability of veterinary healthcare has been a concern for dog owners. However, the majority of those who did need to access veterinary healthcare were able to do so, and most were happy with the quality of care received, including the use of telemedicine instead of face-to-face consultations. In addition to these positive findings, we also found that delays in access to preventative healthcare, and in particular spay or neuter surgery and vaccinations, were common. As a result of COVID-19 safety measures, some owners struggled to understand the vet, explain their concerns, or ask questions. Many owners were distressed about being unable to accompany their dog into the clinic. Some thought that the COVID-19 restrictions led to delays, difficulties for vet-client communication, and ultimately a lower quality of care. Our study has implications on vet-owner communication. The findings suggest that the importance of checking for owners' understanding after the consultation, in particular when these are conducted using telemedicine or when an owner is unable to accompany their dog inside the practice. Finally, our findings indicate that owners may be less distressed to let their dog go inside the vet practice unaccompanied if the owner has a strong relationship with the vet and if their dog had been socialised with the vet before. These findings highlight the importance of socialisation at the vet clinic to set dogs up for happy vet visits. This study was a large team effort, and this slide acknowledges the people involved. We're especially grateful to all the dog owners who took part. Thank you very much for listening. I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have. And if you'd like to get in touch, please send an email to research@dogstrust.org.uk or find us on Twitter, where the Dogs Trust research team are @DT Scholars. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina, for an excellent presentation. And those of us who are veterinarians can relate very much to some of those very vividly described experiences. If anyone has a question, please pop it in the chat. And for the moment, because there's a little lag, I've got one question, if I may. You mentioned there were a number of people who had to cancel routine vaccinations and neutering or desexing of their animals. Has there been any sense that this has had a detrimental effect? Have you seen, for example, increased outbreaks of parvovirus or increased litters of animals, or is it too early to tell as yet?
Thank you for the question, and that's a really good question. It's not something that I'm aware of. It would definitely be worth looking at, but it's not something that I'm sure about. I'm not sure. I think there probably is some data that we could look at to see. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we could find out if those people who did experience the delays have now been able to get their dogs vaccinated or neutered. We're still not sure.
Yeah, it would be very interesting. You also documented some really interesting positive effects, particularly in your qualitative data with the non-contact consults, which I was really surprised at. Do you think there are some aspects of low and no contact consultations that perhaps vet clinics would be would do well to hang on to post-COVID if we get there?
Yeah, I think that definitely for some people there are benefits, and if there could be, options for people to continue with video consults, if that works better for some people, perhaps if they're isolating or for other reasons finding it difficult to get to a vet clinic, perhaps for transport reasons, then having that option I think would be brilliant. Yeah, some people found it really easy and quick just to have a quick chat with somebody, but then for others you can't really replace being there and being present with the dog to explain and have the vet fully see and feel and touch and things. So I think having the combination would be beneficial.
Yes, that lump example was particularly useful in that respect. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Jilly Mendez Ferreira, who is going to talk about what impact has COVID-19 had on our relationship with animals in Scotland. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Hi everyone, I am Jilly Mendez Ferreira. I'm the Head of Education Policy and Research with the Scottish SPCA. I am going to very briefly talk to you about the impact of COVID-19 that we have seen when it comes to relationships between humans and animals in Scotland. Very briefly, the Scottish SPCA is a national organisation. In Scotland, we have been supporting animals for over 180 years. We have a number of animal rescue and rehoming centres throughout the country, as well as a dedicated wildlife rescue centre. We will help any species that comes into Scotland and needs it. It costs around £44,000 per day to run the Scottish SPCA, and our animal helpline is open every day of the year. So I want you to think very briefly about good examples of positive relationships between humans and animals. Certainly, you see lots of examples, no matter how old or young you are. When you see how children interact with animals, often children will see animals as their best friend, someone that they can confide in. Animals are a great way of actually helping families interact with each other and creating bonds between each other. And certainly as you get a lot older and maybe life isn't as hectic, animals can be great at ensuring that you don't feel lonely or isolated, but still actually getting you outdoors and getting you to meet new people. But we know that there's lots of examples where sadly a relationship between a human and animal can become damaged, and that might be due to domestic abuse, it might be financial reasons, relationship breakdowns, impact of things like alcohol and drugs, and of course COVID-19, which is what we're talking about today. So as I said, our animal helpline is open every day of the year. The calls that come in tend to be quite seasonal, so they do fluctuate throughout the year. Generally, our summer months are our busiest months, and we get a lot of calls related to wildlife, and the winter tends to be a little bit quieter. Interestingly though, since June 2021, we've actually received the highest number of calls compared with the last 2 years, and that's very much linked to Scotland actually coming out of another lockdown and restrictions easing. People will call our animal helpline for lots of different reasons. Again, we've actually seen the biggest increase in calls when it's related to donations. We have done some campaigns to try and raise funds. That's been a positive response. People looking to rehome animals from us, but also sadly people looking to rehome animals to us or relinquishing their animals because they're not in a position to take care of them anymore. We've also had calls relating to people concerned about vets' fees and how they're going to actually afford them. There's been a noticeable increase in calls relating to disputes, particularly when it comes to dog barking. So that could be again linked to people initially home working, they go out and purchase the dogs, then some people have actually started returning to work, leaving their dog at home for periods of time. That dog has maybe never actually had that time in the house on its own. So obviously a bit of separation anxiety and is barking away. Generally, we wouldn't go out to dog barking complaints unless there was a welfare concern. That's normally done by our local authorities. When we go out to an instance, that could be something that we are investigating, or we're going out to actually help rescue an animal. Again, this seems to be really high levels in June this year. As I said, this is when restrictions were easing, and particularly when it came to travel. So people were actually allowed to travel further afield in Scotland from June. At the moment, this year is actually proving to be far busier compared to the previous years. We also started sort of categorizing some of the calls when it came to whether people had COVID or not, whether they were self-isolating. We saw a peak in July last year where there were quite a lot of high-risk calls. These are actually people who did have COVID, and they had concerns that maybe they didn't have a support network in place and they needed food, for example, for their dogs. So we helped deliver that service, and maybe they were worried about the animal not getting exercise. So again, we tried to help and support and put them in touch with different organizations who could maybe help them do that. I mentioned that certainly summer months tend to be very busy for us, particularly when it comes to wildlife. We get a lot of calls anyway when it comes to particularly gulls and also fledglings, so young birds that have left the nest but can't quite fly properly yet. When lockdown ended in June 2020, we saw the number of calls related to birds dramatically increase, and this year has been again exceptionally busy. We know that when people were in lockdown, everyone took advantage of having that daily exercise. So people explored new places that were on their doorsteps, and that change of behaviour seems to have continued. And certainly people are exploring outdoors a lot more, and that's possibly why we are seeing this increased calls when it comes to wildlife. We don't tend to get too many calls when it comes to farm animals, but certainly on domestic animals. In 2020, the number of dogs and cats involved in an incident was actually lower than 2019. However, in 2021, the number of incidents seems to be increasing back to pre-pandemic levels. Again, this might be the knock-on effect of people actually purchasing pets during the pandemic, and they're now having more issues now that restrictions have eased. When you look at why animals have come into our centres, in 2019, the main reason was stray animals. These are all yellow dots. But 2020, 2021, this seems to have changed, where we actually got a lot more welfare animals coming in. Welfare animals are people who have maybe called us and they've actually signed the animal over to us because they can't take care of its welfare properly. We've also had quite a few temporary refuge animals. So these are the purple dots. And temporary refuge are animals that we have seized using the legislation that's available in Scotland. And normally have seized those animals because of poor welfare. And then it's up to the courts to decide whether the animal will go back to the owner or whether they get signed over into the Scottish SPCA's care. In July this year, we have actually started to see more strays now come through. And again, the concern is, are these animals that have been purchased during the pandemic and then people are trying to return to sort of normality and they don't have the time for those animals anymore. We did have to change how we rehomed animals. So during the pandemic, obviously we couldn't have people come to our centre, so we had to adopt virtual rehoming. And actually we're now in a position where we're kind of doing a mixture of both, where people will start the process looking at virtual and then they'll hopefully come out and have a meeting outdoors with the animal that they are looking to rehome. One of the biggest problems we've had is a lot of our centres are still full of temporary refuge animals. These are animals that cannot be rehomed because you're waiting for the court's decision. That means we've not had as much space for other animals coming into our care, and we've had to rely on partners such as Dogs Trust to support that because we are at capacity at the moment. The puppy trade has also not helped the types of jobs that we've been dealing with. So since the beginning of the year, we've received over 8,200 reports regarding sick puppies from low welfare breeders, and that's actually up 7.6% on the first half of 2020. We have a dedicated special investigations unit that looks into badger baiting and dog fighting and the puppy trade, and they've actually opened 355 cases regarding low welfare pups so far this year, and that's triple the number at the same time in 2020. We know that demand for puppies have been extremely high. We know that the price has actually soared when you look at the online adverts. And unfortunately, this demand is driven to those dealers and breeders who don't have welfare as their primary interest, actually transporting pups, particularly from Ireland, across into Scotland, selling them, and members of the public are ending up with pups that carry disease, some that actually sadly only last a few days and then they pass away. So this has been a big public campaign that we're continually trying to fight just now. Very briefly, our Animal Guardians programme. This is a programme that works with young people who get referred to us because they're showing behaviours towards animals that are cause of concern. As you will see across the 3 years, the most common sort of species tends to be domestic animals. But we have seen an increase, again, relating to wildlife this year. When you look at why young people have been referred, generally it's because they physically harmed an animal. But again, we've seen a shift. And this year, sadly, 30% of the referrals so far relate to animals actually having been killed. When you look at the sex of a child or young person, generally it tends to be more males that are referred than females. This year it seems to be slightly closer, and it'll be interesting to see where we end up at the end of the year. And we look at the age of referrals. What's been really interesting is in 2019, we saw that it was quite a broad age range, whereas in 2020 and 2021, there's definitely been a lot more younger referrals, and sadly we're getting referrals now as young as 3 years old. I briefly wanted to mention a study that's actually just been completed by the University of Edinburgh. This is a partnership project with ourselves and Blue Cross. And what we're trying to really look at and understand is what support do people actually need with their pets in Scotland? What can we provide to make things easier? This study is currently getting written up into various papers for publication, but some of the key findings were that men are reporting greater challenges with their pets than women. Those with lower resources, so that can be indicated through the employment status, housing measures, benefits and use of food banks, are most likely to experience challenges. What was also interesting was that only a small proportion of people had considered giving up their pet as a result of these challenges, and the majority felt their pet, dogs especially, had helped them during the pandemic. So at least that's a reassuring finding that's coming out. Please go on, there's a web link there, and have a look at lots of different projects. We do work very closely with the University of Edinburgh, and we will always put latest results on that web link, so please check it out. So in conclusion, our ability to rehome animals was definitely impacted by the pandemic. We tried a virtual rehoming model, and we're now doing a sort of blended approach just now. Certainly instances involving dogs, cats and wildlife is increasing since lockdown ended. The delays in the court system due to the pandemic has had a knock-on effect on the number of animals in our care, resulting in major capacity issues. There is new legislation coming in at the end of this month, which will help alleviate this. We have seen an increase in animal guardians referrals with regards to negative interactions with wildlife. We've also seen an increase in referrals of younger aged children, some as young as 3 years old. And sadly, we've also seen an increase in referrals this year of instances where an animal has been killed by a child or young person. There's lots of things that we are trying to do to make a difference. We have an amazing Animal Wise prevention programme that educates everyone of all generations. And that might be running adventure clubs outdoors. It might be delivering e-learning courses, virtual sessions, face-to-face workshops. So please go again, Google Animal Wise, and you can see everything that we are offering. The Scottish PCA is certainly developing its own kind of expansion of the One Welfare. So we're very much embracing One Welfare and Sustainable Development Goals, but we're also bringing in the different stages of development, human stroke animal, and looking at the impacts, both positive and negative, that can have, and then sourcing those partners who can help us work together to bridge that gap between humans and animals. Working together is definitely key. Here are just some of the partners that we work with. As you will see, again, lots of other animal welfare organisations, universities. That's very important that we do continually measure the impact that we're having with our different activities, and also a lot of human charities as well. And again, this is where it's getting that recognition that something happens to an animal, there's normally a human the other side of that. Possibly that human also needs support. And together, our role, certainly at Scottish PCA, is to support the animal welfare side, but we need to make sure that we found the right partner to help the human side as well, so that together we can actually truly make a difference. So I want to say a huge thank you for listening. You've got my email address there. I'm also on Twitter. I think so far, One Welfare Conference, amazing lineup. Really looking forward to the presentations today as well. So thank you, One Welfare, and speak to you soon.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. There's so much food for thought there, and really disturbing about the referrals of children that young. I did have one question that's come through, which is, have you seen an increase in particular popular breeds that have been abandoned or rehomed since the pandemic? Are you seeing any trends there?
Yeah, so we're not really seeing, we've seen it from the sort of puppy buying market. Certainly Dachshunds is one breed that has been quite popular through the pandemic, but you're seeing crossbreeds like your Labradoodles as well, French Bulldogs. It's going to be interesting the next few months, and I know Dogs Trust are the same. The concerns are now that we're going to start seeing pups that were bought during the pandemic, now boisterous sort of adolescent dogs, which haven't had any training, haven't had the usual support you would expect, and are people going to be able to handle them? And that is certainly the biggest concern now. Are we going to get an influx over the next few months?
It certainly sounds like a worry given your increase in calls. Another question that's come through is, are there any services that you're going to offer, or any different services, or are you changing the way you provide services since the pandemic? Understanding that, of course, the study with Blue Cross is pending.
Yeah, so I think one thing we've identified is the support when it comes to veterinary care. There's not as many vets. I know in the UK, it's been slower to recruit vets. We're trying to recruit some ourselves at the moment, and we are struggling. So that's something we want to identify with Blue Cross. Is it working together, having a mobile vet clinic that can go into areas where people who can't maybe access the transport to get to a vet practice? We know vets are so busy. We're running a conference later on the year specifically for the veterinary profession to look at ways, how can we support you as a profession? Because we as an organisation rely on vets to support our investigations, to obviously we employ vets as well. So that's a concern for us, the shortfall of the veterinary profession just now. And yes, we will be focusing on that around the UK, saying what is it that the vet profession needs for support, and what we can do as an animal welfare organisation to help.
That sounds like a great step. Thank you again for a wonderful presentation. I'd now like to move on to our next speaker. So we're going to hear from Robert Chrisley from the Dogs Trust UK, who's going to talk to us about social support for management of dogs during COVID-19. Thank you, Robert.
Hello, my name's Rob Chrisley, and today I'm going to be presenting some of the work that we've done looking at aspects of social support and its impact on the management of dogs during the COVID-19 pandemic in the UK. I'd just like to start by thanking all my co-authors who are listed here. As of late last month, the UK had seen more than 6.5 million cases of COVID-19, resulting in over 132,000 deaths. In the early phases of the epidemic, the focus of national control efforts was on the restriction of behaviours, primarily through lockdowns. So these closed non-essential workplaces and shops, it restricted access to outdoor activities and exercise, and prevented contact between people. So as well as the obvious impacts to people, it was anticipated there would be numerous impacts to dogs. For example, many people were spending much or all of their time at home with their dog. There was a single exercise period outdoors allowed per day per person early in the pandemic. There are clearly restrictions on travel, which might prevent travel to preferred walking areas. And there was closures of boarding kennels, dog walking services, and veterinary services, as we've just heard. Our previous work has identified a wide range of impacts on dogs. And this, for example, has included impacts on walking and the time that dogs have spent playing or being trained by their owners. For example, we found that most dogs will walk less often and for shorter duration, but that this effect was minimized when there were more adults in the household and where additional people could be recruited to help walk a dog. So we're interested in this aspect of the social network around the dog and the impact that it had on its welfare. So the aim of this study today is to better understand the impacts of a lack of support or a perceived lack of support for dog management during COVID-19 lockdowns in the UK. We conducted an online survey during lockdown 1, which was the strictest lockdown in the UK. The survey was open from the 4th to the 13th of May, and the end of the survey coincided with the easing of restrictions from lockdown 1 that allowed unlimited walking for household members. In this survey, just under 4,000 respondents provided information on the support available to them. The follow-up survey was conducted during a period of change in the UK. Following a substantial easing of lockdown restrictions from June 2020, October saw an increase in cases of COVID-19 with the introduction of a three-tiered system of restrictions across different regions in the UK, although none of these were as severe as the first lockdown period. This commenced on October 14. Survey 2 was conducted just prior to a second lockdown that began on November 5th, and the survey ran from the 5th of October to the 2nd of November. We assessed the availability of support based on two questions about support for walking dogs and care of dogs, respectively. Respondents could indicate that they had already accessed support, that they knew they could or were likely to be able to access support, and that could be from within or outside their household, or that support was not available or was probably not available. And these latter two responses were used to identify people that we coded as having limited support. Logistic regression was used for analyses, and this was multivariable as appropriate. So during lockdown, overall, just over 10% of respondents reported that they had limited support available for their dogs. Among these, almost half reported that they had limited care for walking only. 11% reported that they had limited support for care for their dog only, and about 41% indicated limited support for both care and walking. So what were the characteristics of people reporting limited support? So multivariable logistic regression indicated that people with limited support were more likely to be older, that's older than 55 compared to our reference group of 18 to 34-year-olds. They were more likely to be male compared to female, and they were more likely to be living in a single adult household compared to households with more adults. The number of children in the house was also associated in the univariable analyses, but as this was correlated with the number of adults, it was not included in the final model. In addition, limited support was more likely for older dogs, particularly those in the adult category, and where there were 3 or more dogs living in the household. Respondents who reported limited support were also significantly more likely to agree with the following statement, that if living alone and with no help available to care for my dog if I was away, I would delay hospital treatment to care for my dog. So compared to those with support available, which is this group here, those with limited support were more likely to agree, and largely the difference was that there were fewer people in the undecided or unsure category amongst the limited support group. Perhaps this indicates that these people had already considered this possibility, or that the hypothetical question that we posed was more closely aligned with their own experiences. There was also evidence that limited support was associated with respondents' feelings about their dogs. Those with limited support were more likely to report being worried about getting enough food for their dog, the cost of keeping the dog, and also what would happen to their dog should something happen to them. In contrast, there was no significant difference in the extent to which respondents indicated they were happy to have the company of their dog, that they were more relaxed when the dog was with them in their house, or that they were worried about accessing veterinary care. Although I think these results should be interpreted with some caution due to the wide confidence intervals, particularly for those people with limited support. Comparing responses between the initial and follow-up surveys, it was clear that there was considerable change in the availability of support for some people. It should be noted in this figure that people who reported that support was available both during and following lockdown are not shown. 41 people who reported having support available during lockdown subsequently reported that it was not available for walking, care, or both. Of the people who had reported support for either care or walking was unavailable during lockdown, a substantial majority of these reported that it was available during the follow-up survey, perhaps suggesting that these people were reliant on boarding kennels, dog walking companies, or distant or previously shielding family and friends for this support. In contrast, while 50% of people with limited support for both care and walking reported that this was available at the follow-up survey, 1 in 3 reported that both were still unavailable, perhaps suggesting longer-term issues such as social isolation. Within our follow-up survey, relatively few people reported they had experienced a need for support and were yet unable to access this. We estimated that about 0.5% of people were unable to access support for care for their dog when they needed it, and about 0.25% of people were unable to access support for walking their dog when it was needed. However, recognising that there are almost 28 million households in the UK, and about 23% of these have a dog, we estimate by extrapolation that around 30,000 households may have had unmet needs for support with dog care, and about 16,000 may have had unmet needs for support with dog walking. Using a previous estimate of around 1.4 dogs per dog-owning household, this equates to about 42,000 and 22,000 dogs affected by limited support for care and for walking, respectively. The likely selection biases inherent in this study makes these figures somewhat uncertain, but does suggest that there were substantial unmet needs during lockdown 1 in the UK. So in conclusion, we found that many people, about 1 in 6, used support for walking and care during lockdown. And I haven't shown this data in this presentation, but we did also see that about 1 in 10 people reported a lack of access to such support. Now, while this resulted in a relatively small number having unmet needs during the pandemic, it was likely that many thousands of both dogs and people were affected by this lack of support. Now, the numbers did decrease from lockdown to post-lockdown, yet the persistence for some suggests that this may be an ongoing problem for them. The lack of support likely had negative impacts on both human and dog well-being, and it suggests that social isolation may have animal welfare impacts. This may be more common amongst older people, amongst males and those that live alone, and particularly those with older or greater numbers of dogs. So we suggest that these findings suggest that further investigation of One Health and One Welfare approaches to social isolation is warranted. So thank you all for listening. I'd just like to acknowledge all the people that helped us by completing our surveys, and up here are some links to publications related to this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that fantastic talk. And it just reminds me how it often takes a village to look after a dog. We tend to think of the human-animal relationship as one-on-one, but quite a few people require support looking after their animals. So one question we had is, if you could choose one intervention based on the information that you've gathered, how can we support those dog owners in a future situation?
It's a really good question, and I think quite a difficult one for me to answer, because I think I think the intervention would really be about building community context and social context for people. So I think an intervention where it was a multi-agency working both with those of us who work looking towards animal welfare, but in particular working with isolated people, the aged, and so on, would be the sort of thing I would be looking for, to try and build contacts amongst them. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a difficult area, but one I think that very much could be looked at.
Thank you. And it shows just how much, I guess, loneliness and social isolation are a one welfare issue, requires one welfare solutions.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. We will move on to our last oral presentation. So our next speaker, Paulina Munoz-Garces, is going to be speaking in Spanish. So remember to turn on your translator, press the language button if you need to. So the talk is going to be about the effect of imposed movement restrictions on the well-being and interactions of humans and their pets. Thank you very much.
Hola, soy Paulina Muñoz
Hello,
Garcés, médico.
Paulina Edith Castes. I work for the San Carlos Institute, and I want to show you the effect on the restrictions on the well-being and welfare and also interaction between humans and animals. In this study, we have Rodrigo Nova participating from the School of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Glasgow, Ali Curson from the School of Veterinary Medicine and Science from the University of Nottingham, the UK, and me, Paloma Muñoz Garcés. We all know that control measures because of the COVID-19 gave as a result the imposition of some social distancing measures and measures to restrict the movement around the world. These measures have the objective to reduce the risk of propagation of this disease. However, these measures could also affect the well-being of humans and animal welfare. The objective of our study was to understand the potential impact of these measures in human and animal welfare and well-being. That's why we had an online interview using the JISC tool. Previously, the study was approved by the Committee of Ethical Revision of the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and Science from the University of Nottingham, the UK. The public or this survey was addressed to owners of pets where there were movement restrictions such as social distancing. The survey was made of 23 questions categorized in 3 groups: a group of general questions for general information, a group of questions about information about restrictions, and the last group of questions was related to the welfare of pets and their owners. The survey was distributed through email and social media from April to June 2020. Social media used were Messenger, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Twitter. You can see the results now, and the fact is that we received more than 800 responses from 20 different countries, the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Oceania. From these responses, we can say that more than 600, 68.4%, were about people who said that they had a dog, a cat, or both. The fact is that we didn't find a lot of results about fish and reptiles, but some people stated to have a reptile or fish as a pet. The restrictions that people talked about was curfew, social distancing, the fact of needing a license or a permit to go out of the house. These restrictions were presented in an individual way or in combination of 2 or more restrictions. If we take into account the analysis of the questions, we are going to find the following. You can read question number 12, which is, do you spend more or less time at home because of restrictions? 93% of them answered that they spend longer periods of time at home. If we take into account the questions of the group about welfare and well-being, we can look at question number 15. This question is, do you feel that the welfare of your pet has changed because of the restrictions? 53% of the persons said yes, it changed. They could also state in which way the welfare had changed, and most of the people said that the change was positive or negative, either positive or negative. This was related to the type of pets and the type of restrictions. We found positive evaluations of people because there was more interaction with pets and longer periods for walks, etc. And then negative consequences in the areas which people found more restrictions because they couldn't go out or they couldn't walk their dog in the street, and pets were bored. For those people having birds as pets, they observed that the pets were more stressed. When we asked about the well-being of humans, 68% of people stated that they changed, that their well-being changed. And most of the changes were negative, especially in terms of mental health and also physical health. People reported that they were more anxious because they couldn't exercise themselves. We can go now to question number 17, which is, do you feel that the routine, the habits of your pets have changed with restrictions? 62% of people say yes. And when they were asked, how do you think the routine or the habits were changed? The scope is more or less, as we said before, this depended on the type of pets and on the type of restrictions. But we could see that some people said that it was positive when they could go out more often, and they could interact also more often with their pets. In those areas with more restrictions, the possibilities of going out were reduced, and the pets didn't go out as often as needed. In the case of people with cats, we didn't receive any type of reports. Question number 18 says, and your routine, the routine of owners, what is your routine, or has it changed? 92% of people responded yes, because they were longer periods of time at home, and also because of their food habits, their sleep habits and exercise habits changed. Some of these changes were not negative. Some people consider these changes positive because they could have more time to cook, they could exercise themselves at home, and they also slept longer periods of time. If we take into account question number 19, which is as follows, can you explain how your pet made you feel before restrictions and after the implementation of restrictions? The main response received was related to this feeling of love for their pets. They also felt happy, they felt good. Pets made them feel happy and loved. This is a cloud of words in Spanish and English because the interview was performed in both languages. But we changed a little bit the question, and we asked them, how can you explain how your pet is making you feel during the implementation of restrictions? And now we find that pets made owners feel love again, happiness again, with purpose in life, less stressful, feeling like they have a company that they could go out and practice exercise. They felt less alone or lonely. And if we analyze two specific questions related to the feelings or the importance of pets for their owners before restrictions and after restrictions, there were people who classified different types of feelings, and we can observe that unconditional love, the fact of having a friend or being able to interact, the feeling of safety, to have a purpose in life, to be something positive for the family, are elements that are present before restrictions. In interaction is about 136 in the 6th place. 8 is the most important value and 1 is the less. But this question is different in number 22, which is about the restriction period, and we can observe different changes in the percentages. The fact of being something that entertains owners changes. And during restrictions, we can see a higher percentage of people saying that pets were very good to slow down and to be less stressful. The reason for practicing exercise is quite interesting. Before, pets were not considered a method to practice exercise before restrictions and after restrictions. With regards to question number 23, we can say that there are some statements on the left that are related to the feeling of well-being of people in relation to their pets. And we can observe here that without the pet, some people couldn't face restrictions, and we can observe that 64% of people responded that they agree with the statement that they feel better with their pets. From the implementation of restrictions, I interacted more with my pet. This is another statement ratified by 76% of the respondents. Because of my pet, during the implementation of restrictions, I feel less lonely. This is another statement approved or agreed by 73% of the respondents. Because of my pet, during the restrictions, I feel less stressed, which was also a statement ratified by 69% of the people. They felt less anxious, as you can see, 57% of them feel less stressful, and less depressed. 62% are less depressed because of their pets. As we can see, the fact of having a pet helps owners to cope with movement restrictions. Most of the owners reported to perceive that their pets' welfare improved during restrictions because there was more interaction between owners and pets. We also reported that anxiety because of the separation that happened after the restriction was something negative for animal welfare. And finally, it is true that animal welfare and human well-being is interconnected during the pandemic. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you can enjoy this conference.
Thank you, Paulina, for a fascinating presentation.
Gracias.
And again, thank you. We have a couple of brief questions, if I may. The first is, do you have a sense of whether there was a difference in the types of trends between different countries?
Sí, se presenta diferencia. No lo quisimos
Yes, we wanted to get into much detail about the different countries because it was very difficult to perform the interview. But the differences that we observed between the countries have to do with the type of restrictions. You know, the countries had different types of restrictions during the pandemic, and there were countries in lockdown, but then they couldn't go out at any moment. They couldn't take their dog out, for example, and they saw that it was very negative for their pets not to go out. They spent longer periods at home, but the fact of not going out was very negative. Some other countries were in lockdown, but they could go out for specific periods of time, and they saw it was very, very positive to be at home, but being able to go out.
Thank you. And one other question. Did the feelings of stress and loneliness reported by owners vary according to the species of animal they lived with?
No se ve
Not
diferencia.
really. We couldn't see any differences in different species. The general feeling is that mental health was very important, and it is also related to the type of restrictions. For many people, it was very difficult to be at work, for example, and having to go back at home and then do not have the possibility to go out, to go for shopping, etc. Some countries require people to have permits to go out, and the feeling of freedom was very limited. The fact of having a pet, dogs and cats mainly, generated this feeling of being a little bit more happier, but we couldn't find a statistical relationship between the feeling and the type of animal. I'm in Chile right now, and we had a lot of lockdown periods, and we were allowed to go out at just once per week for shopping, and this was very stressful. But people with pets were more in contact with other type of being, and they were just happier and forgot about their problems.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And you probably didn't notice, but my cat was listening to your presentation. He was in front of the camera. So we're going to start the One Welfare Science Slam sessions soon. We're just going to play a brief tune for you now. Thank you. So welcome to this next session. And our first speaker is Alejandra Feld from the Universidad de Buenos Aires in Argentina. And the talk is about human perception of emotional state, quality of life, and pet behavior in times of COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Alejandra Fell y soy esa personita chiquitita que está en
Hello everyone, my name is Alejandra Fell. I'm this little person in the picture next to my name. I will be presenting a work in progress that I started last year with a group of people from different professional and scientific disciplines with the same mental problem, because we all like to get into trouble. And so we decided to study the human-animal relationship. Hello, how are you? Here I am down here. Why is that? Well, because it's clearly convenient for the plot. But also with the arrival of these two companions I've got now on my side, I started thinking both dogs and cats are domestic species that co-evolved with us for centuries, and today they live in our homes. They spend all their time there. That clearly has to generate a bond. Have you ever wondered what that bond means? Well, I do. But I ask questions all the time. People end up telling me, Ale, don't ask so many questions. Curiosity killed the cat, which I don't understand. But nevertheless, doesn't matter. I wonder what the human-animal bond really means. Well, one of the most comprehensive definitions describes it as a mutually beneficial and dynamic relationship between humans and non-human animals, influenced by behaviors that are essential to the health and well-being of both. This includes emotional, psychological, and physical interactions between humans, animals, and the environment. Well, then this relationship should be good for both humans and animals. I think every earthling is aware that during the 2020 global pandemic affected mankind not only from an epidemiological point of view, but also from a psychosocial point of view, because we were suddenly forced to stay at home, and that meant that we spent a lot more time with our two-leg or four-leg companions. Several of us from the Gaia group had a lot of time available, and we decided to do a survey among the Uruguayan population with some very simple exploratory questions. The questions were closed-ended, and the participants could answer whether the condition they were asked about had improved, had not changed, or had worsened. We wanted to know whether people perceived changes in the pet's behavior and how these changes related to people's quality of life and mood. finally, we also asked them about the relationship or the bond with the pets during that period. We posted our anonymous and voluntary survey on our social media, and no one responded to it. No, that's exactly what everyone's fear when you post something on social media. No, the truth is that we were so lucky that 1,000 people wanted to participate and answer it. So now I'm going to share with you some preliminary results. Well, connecting some of the responses in terms of the pet behavior, people, when they said that the fact that we have a pet with me has improved my quality of life, had 30% more likely to observe improvements in their pet's behavior compared to those whose quality of life was not improved by the presence of the pet. We also observed that people who improved their mood during quarantine were 8% more likely to perceive an improvement also in their pet's behavior during that same period. Always comparing those who considered that there had been no improvement in relation to mood. Again, in relation to mood, those responsible for dogs were 38% more likely to improve their mood than those who do not live with any kind of pet. Those who live with dogs and cats were 42% more likely to improve their mood than those who do not live with any kind of pets. Some of the results for the effects of pets on people's quality of life coincide with the previous ones. Like, for example, respondents who perceive an improvement in their pet's behavior were 14% more likely to perceive an improvement in their quality of life due to the presence of their pet. This is consistent with the results of pet behavior. Those who did not live with other humans were 5% more likely to perceive that their pet was improving their quality of life than those who actually live with other humans. This data adds evidence to the idea that living with pets can actually improve the lives of people who live alone with no other humans. An interesting fact, and here I am. Well, I'm keen size, and you may ask why. What are we going to do with all these results? But it's clear that living with pets can improve our lives, partly because on the theory of biophilia, which states that living with other non-human living beings lowers our stress levels and helps us to connect with nature. But this work also shows that the behavior of pets, as well as people's perception of them, is positively correlated with people's quality of life and people's mood. These connections may help us to better understand the effects of living with pets, especially during a confinement or lockdown. We believe that their companionship can operate as a social buffer for us as occupational enrichment. Sustained analysis of this study may also help us to understand the relationship between human well-being and animal welfare. However, in the future, we would like to investigate a little bit more about what people mean by improvement or worsening of their pets' behaviors. And we should also conduct objective assessment of the behavioral changes of these pets, as well as analyzing the implications this has for their welfare. As the intention for our work is to function as a way of a trigger to ask ourselves and to ask you more questions about this bond, it is also for a next stage our aim to investigate whether our own lockdown worked or not, to reflect on the lockdown, the confinement, and even the caging that we subject the rest of the animals to, that often inconsiderate way. Thank you for your attention. And if you got this far and did not fall asleep, here you have some different ways to contact me or our anthropology group with which I did this work. See you soon.
Thank you. And I don't think anyone was in any danger of falling asleep during that presentation. I should say for this section as well, we aren't taking questions. But please note to watch very closely these presentations because you are able to vote for someone to get the award. Well, actually, the 3 most awesome presentations. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Isabella Wild from World Horse Welfare UK, who's going to talk about the One Welfare impact of COVID-19 on the working equid community, responses from 1,530 participants receiving NGO support in 14 LMICs. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Izzy Wild, and I'm going to talk about the One Welfare impact of COVID-19 on the working equid community. This research was carried out by World Horse Welfare in partnership with the University of Nottingham. Today I'm going to use illustrations to help chat through the results. World Horse Welfare works with equids and equid-owning people across the world in low and middle-income countries, across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. There are 14 partner projects. Working equids are horses, donkeys, and mules, which are relied on by many people in their lives and livelihoods. Where the 14 projects work, many people rely on these working equids. Improving equid and human welfare in these communities is a one welfare issue. In many cases, people have been marginalised, and poor welfare is seen in animals and humans alike. Equids can help with strengthening lives and livelihoods, but are often an invisible production animal. To illustrate this, take this farming couple. They have a mule that helps them collect and sell water to other people within their community, and also taking farming produce to market in the town. The mule also helps collection of firewood, a task that the wife would have to carry out on her own if she didn't have an equid to help with this task. Due to the remoteness of where they live, the infrastructure and the roads are poor, but the equids are able to provide excellent tractive power across this terrain. The mule is also able to transport people and provide access to wider communities and towns. For example, taking the children to school or members of the family to hospital. World Horse Welfare partner organisations work to improve equid welfare within the wider community dynamics. Through these examples, we can see how equids contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the part that improving animal welfare plays in this bigger picture. 11th of March 2020, a COVID-19 pandemic was declared. This swiftly affected the countries in which the partner organisations work. The aim of the study was to report the impact of the pandemic upon the individuals utilising working equids and upon the welfare of the animals themselves. Without going into too much detail, in summary, the survey was carried out across 14 countries between the 10th of November to the 31st of December 2020, and it was carried out in multiple languages, face-to-face, over telephone or online. There are a total of 1,530 responses across 14 partner projects. The majority of these were face-to-face. In Latin America, there are approximately 850 responses, in Africa, 330, and in Asia, 350. Most commonly, equids were used for freight transportation, for example, the transportation of building materials, crop transportation, such as coffee or sugarcane, and the transportation of people. There was little change in the type of work comparing the time of survey completion to pre-pandemic levels. There are some regional differences. Owners reported workload had changed most commonly due to change in demand, government enforcement or national restrictions, or local enforcement and regulations. Across all regions, most equids were working less compared to pre-pandemic levels, as shown by the green arrow. With the equids working less, most owners reported decreased income derived from their equid. Some examples of how equid owners were affected. Equids are currently not working due to a low number, 3 equids have died, and others are in poor condition. I use my donkey to collect firewood and sell it to the community members. But now after COVID-19, many people are no longer able to buy wood. Hence, the income generated per month has decreased. I normally plough for people, but few people afford to pay, and money generated per month is lower. We used to have village horse racing, but activities are prohibited due to COVID-19 regulations, so money made from the horse has decreased. Along with the decrease in equid income, monthly household income decreased for a similar percentage of equid owners, which is shown in pink. However, monthly household expenses and outgoings shown in blue remain the same for many, or increased. With equids working less, it could be hypothesized that equids would be in better condition or have fewer welfare issues. However, the results for this question varied regionally. This is where the country context was useful to interpret the results. In Latin America, many owners reported their equids remained the same body condition. In Africa, many reported they decreased body condition, and there have been recent devastating droughts in the region. In Asia, there have been a lot of recent rainfall and grass growth. As such, many reported their equids to be in good condition. Additionally, most reported there was no change in health status of their equid. An important limitation of the study is that this is an owner-reported health and welfare status, and this might differ from an objective welfare assessment carried out by someone who is impartial, but the results do provide insights into how equid's health may have changed during this time. Equids play an essential role in human lives and livelihoods in lower middle income countries, including the transportation of crops, goods, and people. The type of work did not change much in the pandemic in the short term. Most equids were working less, and equid-derived income and overall household incomes have decreased, with expenses not changing or increasing. Equid welfare changes were variable at the time of survey completion, and there were some regional differences. People living in these communities were already marginalised, and the impact of the pandemic increases the rich-poor divide. There is job insecurity, lack of income support, and lack of governmental safety nets. Equid welfare wasn't the most concerning area to address from the results, but this will need close monitoring with time. Further surveys are currently being developed to monitor the longer-term impacts. For example, to see if income returns to the same level in these communities, or if equid welfare is affected more as owners are unable to afford to care for them. This is an important one welfare issue. Human and animal welfare need to be addressed together to mitigate the knock-on effects of the pandemic. Collaboration with humanitarian NGOs, governments, and other animal NGOs is required. Thank you for listening, and to all that took part in this survey. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me or check out the published article.
Thank you for another excellent presentation. We're now going to move on. Amy Morris from the Vancouver Humane Society in Canada is going to talk about supporting healthy and sustainable human-animal bonds, examining pet guardians' access to veterinary medical and behavioural services during COVID-19. Amy, take it away.
And welcome to Supporting Healthy and Sustainable Human-Animal Bonds, examining pet guardians' access to veterinary medical and behavioural services during COVID-19. Dr. Auri Wu from the School of Social Work at Dalhousie University and myself, Amy Morris from the Vancouver Humane Society, partnered together to create a research study called Compounding Crisis in Veterinary Services, Lesson Learned from Low-Income Pet Guardians' Experiences at Private Clinics and Hospitals during COVID-19. I'll be sharing that with you today. We suspected that COVID-19 had a big impact on low-income pet guardians. Recognizing that low-income status, combined with the COVID-19 pandemic and people who have pets for emotional support, who may be in need of urgent veterinary assistance, which was limited during the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, could create a recipe for disaster. For example, one participant was quoted as saying, "The problem I found was not being able to go in with him because he wasn't used to vets, so it was scary for him. That was a horrible night. Honestly, that was really, really tough." We designed the research to reflect the experiences of people who were in need and low income. So we decided to use in-depth, semi-structured interviews with people who specifically identified having challenges related to COVID-19 and asked them about the resources and support they received to address these challenges. All of the participants were companion animal guardians who accessed financial assistance for veterinary care from the Vancouver Humane Society in Vancouver, Canada. There were 12 participants total. All of these participants were screened as low income using a guide from Canada's Statistics Department. All participants identified as experiencing limited or no work during the pandemic. There were a number of findings and themes that came out of these interviews. The first was about that participants had experienced a lack of empathy from veterinary workers and found it hard to make decisions of where to go based only on necessity and affordability. They stated that it seemed like that the vets just wanted the money or that there's inconsistency in their pricing and care. They even said that they felt that they were trying to be charged for things unnecessarily and described having gone to a veterinarian where they obviously do not really like animals. Participants also described limited access to financial supports at the time that payments were required. For example, one participant had concerns over the veterinarian keeping an animal in a state of suffering just due to the cost. They suggested the veterinary clinic should be more forgiving and asking for an $800 deposit. Most people, especially with COVID, don't have that kind of money. It would be helpful to work out a payment plan, or if somebody's helping to fund it, maybe they can wait until the next day or a couple of days just to be more helpful that way. It's more for the animal that they shouldn't be gatekeeping that care to keep them from being in distress. Another finding was that there was emotional stress that came from not having finances available. Some participants shared the different stressors they experienced, such as one where they had to do a urine test and it ended up being $450 they didn't have. Another participant outlined that the feeling everything's fine and all of a sudden, bam, right? You just never know. Something's going on with their pet out of the blue and they're not expecting it and feeling that everyone is struggling really hard right now during the pandemic. Participants also experienced acute stress emotionally from seeing their pets suffer and not having the funding available right away to do anything about it. One participant said, "I'd rather go hungry than be able to have my cat die." And another stated, "People live under constant stress because of bills and then having a sick animal. You never want to be in a situation that you have to question your animal's health or life over being able to afford a roof over your head." A final barrier that participants faced was related specifically to COVID-19 emotional stress. One participant stated that not being allowed inside the vet is very heartbreaking, not to be there with them, not knowing what's going on or being able to hang out with them. Another participant said that they didn't have a cell phone. So with the procedures, they had to go to the vet, drop their pet off, and then the vet would expect to call you on your phone while they're doing the exam. So these kinds of situations led to stress on top of the pre-existing stress that these low-income guardians already faced. There were some findings related as well to resilience, and we found that low-income pet guardians are extremely resilient. They have a strong human-animal bond, with guardians saying things like, "I love my cats with all my heart and soul, and I've never had a connection to an animal like this, and she brings us so much joy." Low-income guardians also look for assistance from their family, friends, and community, and that support is really meaningful for them. Even if it's not financial, it provides significant benefits. For example, one participant said, "I asked if a good friend of mine would help us take us to the vet and let me use a cell phone. He let me put coins in the meter, but he wouldn't take any money. That was amazing for him to do because these vet visits were like 45 minutes on the phone, right? You can't really go anywhere for coffee or do anything." Another participant shared that there was quite a few independent women where it was their passion to help others. They couldn't actually do anything other than offer emotionally support, but this community help was really great for the participant. They gave a list of possible contacts and provided a network, and that became something that helped the participant quite a bit. The final finding around resilience is really about the individual resourcefulness of low-income pet guardians. Participants demonstrated that they were resourceful to try to find what they needed to help out their pets. What can we learn from the perspectives of low-income pet guardians, and what are the one welfare actions that we can take? Participants who were interviewed shared about what they thought could be improved to make their own experiences better, and I'll highlight that for you now. The first really falls under trauma-informed service delivery. Participants, as well as other existing research out there, has suggested that low-income clients, like all clients, want to access services that are non-judgmental, empathetic, collaborative, based on collective decision-making and trust. They want their animal services to be culturally competent, respectful, and understanding. We know that the outcome of this approach leads to better understanding for the client, and that means better care for their pet patient. It would also provide an opportunity for clients to feel like they had the capacity to give more kindness to the people providing services, and that leads to better mental health for veterinary and animal service workers. All of this means there's a higher likelihood that a client would go to a veterinary clinic or hospital or access animal services earlier in the future, decreasing the likelihood of more severe animal suffering and well-being for everyone involved. Another finding was really about decreasing barriers to accessing care for low-income pet guardians. Animal service agencies can reduce the limitations on veterinary assistance programming to make them more accessible. They can provide assistance with a variety of pet services, not just veterinary care. They can also provide funding for both preventative and emergency assistance. Finally, they can increase the advertising of programs so private veterinary clinics and hospitals are more aware of them. Likewise, in order to decrease barriers to access care for veterinary services, private clinics and hospitals can offer some things that would really decrease barriers to access care. These include lower costs for low-income pet guardians, offering the opportunity to pay off services over time, considering more standardized prices within a region to make it easier to know where to go, and actively learning about available veterinary assistance programs from animal service agencies, so that they can assist clients when they share the intimate reality that they're experiencing a period of low income. The outcome of implementing all of these trauma-informed service delivery recommendations and decreasing barriers to accessing care is that there's more recognition of the impact that One Welfare has and the cycle of well-being for all involved. This benefits everyone, and they all experience a better outcome. Thank you so much for your time today. Please feel free to contact us at any time.
Thank you so much, Amy. Our next presentation is a triple act from Paul Engvan, Rinda Knopp and Natasha Lee of World Horse Welfare UK, and they're going to talk about the early effects of COVID-19 on participants of an equine welfare program in Cambodia. Thank you.
So today, my name is Pauline Van, and I'm the director of the Cambodia Pony Welfare Organization, CPWO. The organization was founded in 2007 by Dr. Stiria Chune Kamrai and myself. Our vision is a world where human welfare is realized through good animal welfare in Southeast Asia. And our mission is to empower community in responsible animal ownership. With our international partner, World Horse Welfare, we have been able to work with 84 communities representing 2,000 members. Our work is based on three main pillars. Number one, educational, with our workshop and training. Number two, preventional, with our rotation visit. And number three, punctual, with our mobile clinic. In 2020, with the outbreak of the coronavirus 19 in Cambodia, World Horse Welfare and CPWO has conducted a survey to see how impactful the pandemic has on our communities and its working ponies.
I am Rindanop, Project Manager and Senior Veterinary of Cambodia Pony Welfare Organization. We do a lot of activity with pony owner at community. There are pony treatment with mobile clinic, education people, and the owner. Pony dental care, farriery, sedolary, etc. Especially regular rotation, deworming, and prevention to all the pony and owners. We have the difficulty to go into the community because of COVID pandemic in Cambodia. Some community, we get authorization from the chief of village or commune to go into, but some community are not allowed because of COVID outbreak and it locked down. Our activity also doing COVID survey by starting interview our pony owner members by phone call. It is easy for us that we don't go out and travel to meet the people, but it is difficult to communicate because of local language. Some area is different. Local people not good at using modern technology. We need to take time to understand the question and not understand each other. In some area, the owner not use the phone. We have to go there, place to do the survey, but by interview them one by one.
I'm Natasha Lee, and I'm the Regional Coordinator for World Horse Welfare. I'm here to present our main findings from this survey. First thing is, we look at the type of work of the ponies. Now, the type of work is they transport mainly crop, freight, and also people. And the type of work largely remains unchanged as compared to pre-pandemic levels. Now, what has changed is the workload itself. So 71% of the respondents have mentioned that there's a decrease in the workload. And when we ask for the reasons why, they mentioned that it's because of a decrease in a change in the demand for their ponies rather than because of restrictions because of the pandemic. So naturally, when there is a decrease in workload, when we ask them about the income, they've also mentioned that there's a decrease in the income derived from their ponies. So that is majority of our respondents, is up to 79% of them. And compared to household incomes, 76% also mentioned that there is a decrease in the household incomes. So this shows that how the income from the ponies is interlinked with their overall household income. And the cost of upkeep, when we've asked them about cost of upkeep, the cost to maintain their ponies remains largely unchanged. Similarly as well, household expenses also remains largely unchanged for them as compared to pre-pandemic levels. So with decrease of income and with cost of upkeep remains unchanged, are there any support schemes that are available for them? When we ask them, most of them, 92%, actually say either they do not have any support schemes that are available for them or that they don't know of any support schemes for them. Very few of them have some kind of support from financial institutions, governments, or different types of NGO relief. However, support for the animal health is there. So almost all of the respondents have mentioned that they have support from CPWO themselves to help maintain the health of their equine. And this is one of the positive aspects that we've seen, at least the short-term impact from this survey, is that the health of their ponies largely either remains the same or actually the health has improved because of this pandemic. And similarly as well, when we look at the body condition of the equines, 65% of the respondents mentioned that there's increase in the body condition of their ponies. So we've seen a lot of short-term benefits that improves the welfare of the ponies, but we are also very concerned about the long-term outcome and whether the continuous decrease in the income would eventually have a negative aspect on their ponies.
The outcome of the survey has shown a clear link between the working ponies and the role they play in the community's livelihood by being the main source of income to the families. The villagers has been able to care for their ponies with the help of CPWO by preventing from sickness, where else the pony, if they are sick, it will be another burden to the villagers in the hardship during the pandemic. CPWO advocates for one welfare concept. By working at the grassroots level in the communities, we have knowledge of the human welfare needs, and we serve as a bridge to the human welfare organization.
Thank you, Pauline, Rinda, and Natasha. Sorry, thank you for a wonderful presentation. And it was interesting to note everyone was very COVID safe and socially distancing throughout. So much has changed in our lives because of COVID, as we've heard. We have one more presentation in this section, and that is about the dog and cat meat trade, a potential source for future pandemics. And that's going to be given by Karan Krujeka from Four Paws International. Thank you.
Hey, Karan. It's kind of late. What's going on?
Alex, I can't sleep. I just keep on worrying.
What about?
It's the dog and cat meat trade. I'm worried that it will be the cause of the next pandemic. And there are so many ways that it could cause damage. The traumatized animals, the poor hygiene, the extensive networks involved. It really could lead to disaster.
I know what you mean. Let's talk about it. It's part of our job at Four Paws to reveal suffering and to rescue and protect animals under human influence. So go ahead, tell me more.
Well, Alex, an incredible number, 30 million dogs and cats, are killed in Asia every year for their meat. The dog and cat meat trade, I'll call it DCMT from now, involves extensive networks crossing internal and external borders and so many dangerous practices. On top of the real and potential public health effects, it contravenes many principles of the One Welfare Framework, affecting animals, humans, and the environment on a large scale. This is a problem that we really need to work together to address.
That does sound horrifying. Let's go through this from the very beginning, following an animal's journey through the DCMT.
So, Alex, the dangers start right when the dogs or cats are captured. They're often stolen or just taken off the street, and in some cases traded. Poison is sometimes used to kill the dogs, and there have been cases in the past of young children, 3-4 years old, eating this poison and being killed or grievously injured. Dogs are also often beaten into submission. Dogs are sometimes taken off the street right in front of their owners, which in turn has led to vigilante justice and fighting, which has resulted in deaths of thieves and owners and undermined social cohesion.
It doesn't get any better at the next step. Dogs and cats are then packed together in small cages with barely any space to move and transported for long periods of time, often days, and over thousands of kilometers, such as with dogs and cats going from the south to the north of Vietnam, and often being transported across borders. The animals are rarely fed or given water at any point, and traders actually acknowledge that a large percentage of these animals will be dead upon arrival. All these conditions lead to immunosuppression, facilitating pathogen transmission and mutation.
And it gets even worse when they stop, either right before being slaughtered or for aggregation before further transport. The holding stage often goes on for days, with the animals packed close to other species in some cases. Again, food, water, and space are completely absent, further compromising the animals' immune systems and allowing pathogens to mutate, recombine, and potentially novel diseases to emerge.
Slaughter is nothing less than a living nightmare. Either done in live markets or improvised spaces, the slaughter of these animals is done with no consideration to their welfare, the well-being of passers-by, or to hygiene. Waste from these places goes directly into the environment, including nearby bodies of water, fields, streets, and so on. Going very briefly on how animals are slaughtered, we see that this most often is being done by drowning groups of animals, bludgeoning to death, or sometimes even blow torching them alive. We've often seen this being done in front of the public, and even worse, in front of children. The cruelty of the trade seen at every stage has a negative effect and unfortunately desensitizes people to violence. We've even heard of cases of animals being stuffed with water or sand to increase their sail weight before slaughter. Again, more torture and suffering.
Alex, besides that, we've spoken about waste going into the environment, but I still don't quite understand, how can the trade affect biodiversity?
As we've mentioned, there are no hygiene practices whatsoever in DCMT slaughter places. On the one hand, the waste from the trade, like blood and parts of carcasses, result in runoff spilling into nearby water or soil. On the other hand, flies, rodents, and other animals are attracted by this refuse and may then carry potential pathogens, either existing or novel, to other species such as farm or wild animals, essentially functioning as vectors for disease.
And it all sounds so violent and extreme at pretty much every stage. This has harmful effects for society, particularly children that view the trade. The vigilante incidents are very troubling. We simply cannot have people fighting and killing each other. And not to imagine the distress and anger for an owner who finds their dog or cat missing and knowing where they most likely will end up. Besides the theft, the DCMT contravenes multiple laws, including those on animal transport, disease control, and hygiene, with constant ignorance of these laws also potentially disrupting social structures and wider law enforcement.
And now we arrive at the one point you are most worried about, Karan, the potential for the DCMT to be the cause of the next pandemic. DCMT is worrying indeed. The capture of the animals from different origins, the transport and holding with no food and water, the horrific slaughter, all of these actions provide ideal conditions for pathogens to mutate, be transmitted, and for novel diseases to emerge that could also pass the species barrier, leading to what we've witnessed with SARS, MERS, and ours, COVID-19.
And we haven't even talked about the existing debilitating pathogens such as rabies, cholera, and trichinella, which have been factually linked to the DCMT, with rabies outbreaks being seen in association with DCMT in multiple places in Asia. So now you know why I can't sleep, Alex. The DCMT presents threats to human and animal well-being, with ramifications to disease control, animal welfare, environment pollution, and having psychological and social effects. These threats are seen at multiple stages, from capture to transport to slaughter and even after sale, with the extensive networks involved at all stages increasing the threat. The very nature of the DCMT and the fact that it depends on illegal activities at so many stages means that regulation would be close to impossible and really would not effectively address any of the threats we've talked about. Ending the trade is the only way. We must work together for this.
Thanks, Karan. No, I can't sleep either. But thank you for listening, guys. If you're interested in learning more on how DCMT violates the One Welfare principles, as well as finding out more on other posters by Four Paws on One Welfare related issues, please go check these out. Thank you once again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Alex and Karan, and perhaps a few more of us won't be sleeping tonight either. It's a very thought-provoking presentation. I'd like to thank all of our speakers from the One Welfare Slam session. That was just brilliant. Thank you for keeping to time and for providing so much for us to think about. One reason I think I will be getting some sleep is knowing that there are so many passionate people who are working on One Welfare and pushing this forward. So thank you very much. I'd now like to go to our first break, and so we'll reconvene at 11:05. I've been Anne Quain. Thank you. It's been a pleasure joining you.